Hi, everybody. My name is Maria.
And I'm Katie.
And we'll be chatting with you today about clinical psychology PhD program at UVA specifically. So first, tell you a little bit about me. As I mentioned, my name is Maria. I am a third year in the clinical psychology PhD program here at UVA. And during my time here thus far, I've taken on two primary roles, one in a research capacity where I've done some work looking at how we can best detect anxiety as it's happening in daily life. And then I also have a really big interest in emotion regulation, and in particular, how can we understand how people are coping with their feelings and what are more or less helpful ways to do that. In addition to that, I've taken on a role as a clinician where I see clients in an assessment capacity to sort of figure out what is a parsimonious way to explain an experience that they're having in a way in which their life isn't going how they had hoped. And then also in an intervention role in which a lot of the focus is in helping people who might be experiencing anxiety, depression, or just overall are in a situation where the way they're living their life is not the way they would like to be living. So helping them bridge that gap.
And I am in my 5th year, and just for context here, 5 years is typically what you would expect somebody to take to get through this program before they apply to what's called a clinical internship, which I'll tell you a little bit about as we get through this presentation. And what I have been doing in my 5 years has been to study, just like Maria, emotion regulation. And I have a particular interest in how to use methods to better understand the complex changes and how people are going between different emotion regulation strategies in their actual day-to-day lives. And not surprisingly, given that I just said that I'm studying the same kind of thing that Maria is studying, is you see on both of our slides, we have the PACT lab, a symbol towards the left, and then Bethany Teachman's face on the right. And the reason for that is that Maria and I are both in the same lab here at UVA, so the Program for Anxiety, Cognition, and Treatment. And as much as I think that our research is super cool, and I do know that there are a lot of other really cool labs doing awesome research at UVA in the clinical area outside of the PACT lab. But sort of separate from the research that I do, I also have a couple of other roles that I take on, just like Maria. So one thing that you'll be hearing again and again throughout this presentation is that if you come to be a clinical student, you will get to do a lot of different types of things. So outside of research, another thing that we do a lot of is actually providing that therapy. So providing interventions, assessments. And because I'm a little bit further along in the program, I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different settings to provide this type of care. So in inpatient psychiatric centers, in integrated primary care settings within the hospital over here. So lots of different places to work with different populations and provide different types of services, which is really great for training. Outside of our research and clinical roles, we also take on different types of teaching obligations that can look like TAing a class where you're just sort of helping out students and helping out the instructor of record, or even sometimes having the opportunity to actually run your own class, which is what that instructor of record term means. So I've been able to do both of those things, teach my own class and then also help out in TA-ships.
So to kick us off for the first part of this presentation, I'll be giving you a really broad strokes overview, of clinical. And if we go to like the American Psychological Association website, they define clinical in a really broad way. And that sort of ties to what Katie was saying before of there's a lot of things you can study. And if you go on our department website, you might see labs have all different kinds of things that they emphasize in their research. But in any case, APA sort of says, clinical psychology focuses on emotional and behavioral issues, which that's pretty broad, difficulties that you might encounter in a relationship or at work, post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction, among other topics. Here at UVA, part of the mission statement for the clinical psychology program is to provide students with a broad skill set that they need to offer the most widely used and research-supported assessment and therapy approaches. And I would say in addition to that, there's a big emphasis on training students on I guess evidence-based research seems kind of odd to say, but like best practices in conducting that research and asking questions in a lot of cases that directly inform and are informed by the clinical work that you are doing. And increasingly, which is something that I found really encouraging, there's a focus on studying health in marginalized populations within UVA and also across the field of clinical psychology more broadly. Now, Katie was saying we wear a lot of different hats or take on a lot of different roles when we are clinical psychology students. And if we could summarize 3 buckets that you might expect One of them is coursework, so taking classes, you're a student differently than how you were in undergrad, but you're taking classes in clinical, so that might entail learning about different models for how you treat anxiety or depression, for instance, learning about different skills as to how you might want to do that. And then also coursework on research, so how to apply different kinds of statistical techniques, in addition to coursework on how to be an effective teaching assistant, how to be an effective instructor of record. In addition to that, there is this component of clinical training, which is pretty substantial. You also take coursework in which you're learning a lot of these skills. And then there's also a really important component of directly applying those skills with clinical populations. Then the third bucket is research training, which again involves coursework, as you might expect, study design, and just learning how to develop and test hypotheses that you're interested in, and then writing up that research and communicating it within and outside the academic community. Over the next few slides, I'm showing you several tables that summarize which courses would you take if you came to UVA and did the clinical psychology PhD program. So as you'll notice, if you look at the year column on the right, a lot of this is stacked in those first 2 years. So you come in, you're learning a lot about assessment. So that might include some like intelligence testing is how a lot of people call it, or just learning how to assess different facets of someone's cognitive and emotional functioning. There's also courses about how to be a therapist is what it boils down to. And that's more so starting in your second year. And throughout those first 2 years, you're also doing these practicum or team courses in which you're learning about different parts of the field. So the history of the field of clinical psychology, delving in a little deeper into multicultural issues, how to work effectively with different client populations, ethics within clinical psychology, and also supervision. In addition to that, there are sort of these more sparse requirements that you do throughout. So for instance, attending these Friday area meetings is the one time a week where we all come together, often to see a speaker that we've invited from another university. And there's also ethics training that you have to keep up with in order to work with and collect data. And also there is a teaching assistant component. You have to do it at least once. Students typically do it throughout their time in the program, unless they're having an external funding mechanism that is paying their stipend, essentially. And here I'm summarizing a few more in those first 4 rows. Basically, all that's saying is there are different levels or different practicum, as we call it, that you do throughout your first 4 years in the program. That's basically different ways to get clinical experience in both assessment and intervention. And in that 5th line, it's summarizing the due dates for the pre-dissertation research project, which I'll tell you more about in just a little bit. And then for the second half of the table, Katie will be chatting with you about in just a little bit. So for the pre-dissertation, in a lot of programs, they call this a master's thesis. Essentially what this is an independent research project. You can use new data that you collect or pre-existing data if your lab already has data on a topic that you're interested in. And it's essentially a full research paper, which you're leading from start to finish. You're coming up with a question, hypotheses, how to test that question, and then putting this all in sort of like a research paper in psychology format. And you're working on this with your advisor primarily. In my case, I was really I guess, blessed to get feedback from my lab as well. So that was really nice at several points in time. And once you're sort of like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good about this, you send it to a second reader, which in my case was someone with expertise in the method that I was using. And they are able to say, hey, make these changes, or hey, looks good. And that's sort of a second checkpoint. Once you've gotten your advisor and a second reader to sign off, you then present it to the area lunch. And in some places, you have to do an official defense. In our case, it's more like an informal, let me share with you all what I did and celebrate. And to make this a little bit more concrete, I can share with you a little bit about my pre-dissertation. So it was focused on examining the effectiveness of an online intervention to reduce anxiety and increase flexible thinking about ambiguity. And in particular, we were interested in examining how anxiety tied to COVID, because this was data we collected during the pandemic, influenced the effects of the intervention.
Great. And so once you get through your pre-dissertation, the next kind of main hurdle that you're wanting to get over is called comps, or comprehensive exams. So this is something that Maria will be doing this summer because they've just finished up their third year and are going into their fourth year. So typically students are completing comps during the summer after your third year. What comps looks like at UVA is actually super practical. So there are 3 major tasks that you undergo to satisfy your comps requirements. This does look different at different universities, so good to check to see what it is that's expected of you at the universities that you're applying to. But I really do like how UVA stays pretty practical. It's trying to serve you in different kind of professional development ways. So the things that you'll be doing are, first, you're going to need to apply to a grant or write a review paper. This is going to be the main chunk out of the 3 that you do that's going to take the most of your time. But when it comes to applying to a grant, most people will apply to the NRSA, which is a national grant. One thing to be aware of is the NRSA does require that you're a US citizen to be eligible to apply. So that's just something to put on your radar, just to say that you do not need to apply to the NRSA. There are a lot of different mechanisms that you can apply to. Just chat with your advisor about what your research interests are, what's going to be a good fit for what you're looking for. And also just to put on your radar that if you are applying to a different type of grant mechanism, the deadline and the timing of that might be a little bit different than the typical NRSA timeline. So just have that on your radar and talk with your advisor early so that you make sure you're not missing anything that you would not like to miss. Like, for example, I have the Jefferson Fellowship. Below that is actually the grant that I applied to, which is internal to UVA. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a national level grant that you're applying to. And to be super clear, you do not have to have the grant awarded to you for this to satisfy your comps requirement. You just need to kind of go through the steps of putting together a strong application, but it does not need to be awarded for this to satisfy. If you don't want to write a grant, like that doesn't serve you, it's no good fits out there, or you're just interested in writing a review paper, that's another thing that you can do in place of applying to a grant. And the review paper can be qualitative in nature, or it can be a meta-analytic review. So there are a lot of different ways you can go about that sort of large scoping paper. So you do either or, not both, unless you're very ambitious. Okay. Once you get through that kind of grant or review paper process, the next thing that you're going to want to do is conduct a peer review. So in all of the journal articles that we're aiming to publish, those are typically going to be published in peer review articles. And so this is sort of flipping that on its head. And now we're actually acting as the peer reviewer. So we're giving the kind of feedback and constructive criticisms to somebody who submitted their work to try to help make the work better. So you're going to go through this process of writing out your reviews and sort of communicating back and forth with the authorship team to hopefully help them arrive at an even stronger submission before it's eventually accepted for publication, or maybe it ends up not being published because there's something that's challenging about it. And then the third thing that you'll be doing is developing a syllabus. So this is something that you get to put together that is really designed to be a course that's taught on anything that you want to teach a course on. It's most likely going to be in your kind of research area of interest, just because it's going to be a lot easier. You know that literature, you know the field better at this point. But it's just an opportunity to kind of think through, if I wanted to teach something, what would I want to teach and how would I go about teaching it? I mentioned that this is a really kind of practical, applied way to go about comps, and this is a perfect example of this being really useful to you down the line. Because let's say you end up wanting to apply to a teaching focused university for your job down the line, or even just a research focused university. A lot of times as part of your application materials, they might ask for a syllabus example. So now you already have one that started and you've gotten feedback on. Just like with pre-dissertations, like Maria was talking about, you will have your primary advisor sign off on your comps material, as well as 2 additional reviewers, and you can choose who those reviewers are. All right, so we've crossed a lot of different hurdles at this point, satisfied a lot of different requirements. The last kind of major requirement outside of that clinical internship, which I'll talk about in a minute here, is your dissertation. As part of your dissertation, there are a couple of different kind of stages. So one is your dissertation proposal. That's where you're setting forth your plan for what it is that you want to do as your dissertation body of work. That is a written formal proposal, and it includes a defense. So you are talking to your committee about what it is that you're wanting to do, and they're asking questions and basically making sure that they all understand and you understand what it is that you're hoping to do, so that everybody's on the same page. Your committee is made of your primary research advisor. So for us, that's Bethany. And then I believe it's 2 additional committee members within psychology, and then 1 external committee member. So for me, it's Bethany, 2 quantitative area faculty in psychology, so Steve Boker and Teague Henry, and then my external reviewers in systems engineering, so Laura Barnes. But again, this is like the group that you choose to be the people who you want their feedback in. They have expertise and interesting ideas to bring to the table. And that dissertation proposal is really an opportunity to kind of talk about things that you're interested in and really solidify what it is that you're going to do. It's also a nice opportunity to basically make a contract with your committee to say, if I do this, regardless of what results end up coming out, you will give me a PhD at the end of it because I've done my best science and we all agreed to it ahead of time. So this is also a way to protect you as the student to say, hey, we were all on the same page ahead of time and I did that. So let's move forward to the actual dissertation defense, which then happens much later. One thing to kind of just put on your radar in terms of making it concrete is that your dissertation can look all sorts of different ways. Many different types of projects are undertaken by clinical psychology students at UVA. For me, I have a 3-study dissertation. You don't have to do 3 studies in your dissertation. That's just a model that fits for me. But I'm actually doing a really quantitatively like methods development focused dissertation. So only one of my 3 studies actually uses data from real people looking at how they're changing their emotion regulation strategies over time. The rest of the studies are actually using simulated or kind of fake data to try to see how this method actually works on like generated numbers. Compare that with my friend Shannon Savell, who is doing a intervention focused dissertation where she's actually she developed and is delivering an intervention via telehealth to couples who are approaching the transition to parenthood. So you can see a very wide range of super basic methods work to applied clinical intervention types of dissertations, and there's everything in between. Now, taking us to a really important part of it all is why are we doing this like 6 or 7 years of work? It's because I know eventually we want to be in the workforce. So there are a lot of flexible career paths that can come from a clinical PhD. You see some kind of areas that are listed on my screen here, but you'll notice that some are more heavily research focused, some are more industry, some are more policy, others are more clinically focused. And there's a lot of ways to actually combine these areas of interest in a future career. And one thing that I've been alluding to that's kind of a job, but also still part of your training experience is internship. That is something that we want to kind of highlight here because it's different from other types of areas in psychology, where we're the area that has a 1-year mandatory required pre-doctoral clinical internship, which you do have to apply to. And it's separate from being at UVA, so you can end up really anywhere in the US. I mean, I have a friend that's in Alaska right now doing their internship, so you can go all over the place. And why this is important is you do need to actually go to this clinical internship before you can be awarded your PhD. Even if you've done your dissertation and it's passed, you need the pre-doctoral internship, which is a 1-year, heavily clinically focused year of training that happens. And so kind of when Maria is talking about all those different clinical hours and training experiences, that becomes relevant because you need to have a certain amount of hours in both intervention and assessment focused types of direct patient care to be able to apply competitively for these types of for these types of internships. So, as you're thinking about your coursework, you're also wanting to be thinking about the way that you're getting clinical training in there too. So with that, we just wanted to, put up our contact information on the screens. We're super happy for anybody to reach out to us either by email or on Twitter if you have any questions about this process. And, we're excited for you and are wishing you the best as you decide how you want to navigate this process and hope it all works out.